This is Trench Diaries. Overlord. Utah Beach. Part 3. Gefreiter Stefan Heinwetz. Losing self-control was not the norm. The men were well disciplined. Some of them produced crucifixes or rosaries and said prayers, others seemed to be simply cursing, both were inaudible, but I could see their mouths moving. This bombing lasted perhaps a minute or two, but seemed endless. Cracks appeared in the concrete ceiling of the bunker and large pieces fell from the upper edge of the embrasures. Some of this masonry hit our troops, crushing several limbs. These men could only lie on the concrete floor and wait for the situation to end. When the bombs stopped, there was a pause of several seconds and I peered out. I could see, through all the dust and smoke outside the bunker, that the blockhouse on our right had been blown open partially and there was a large hole in one side. The trench that had been hit was a horrible mess, with many dismembered bodies lying around it, many smoldering or contorted and blackened. I could hear flames and detonations from the other side of our bunker too. Then the shout went up again. Aircraft. It seemed that the Americans had an endless stream of planes available, which were always arriving freshly armed on top of us. These new aircraft were also Thunderbolt types, however, as they approached, I saw the white streaks of light from under their wings and the descending lines of vapor which showed they were using rockets. I had never seen rocket explosions close at hand before, and did not know what to expect. The effect of these rockets was in some ways worse than the bombs. The warheads used some kind of incendiary material which exploded with a very intense white light and then burned and expanded with a hissing noise. I saw one of the first rockets detonate in this way against the other bunker. The white flames covered the structure and entered the hole that was blown in one side, all the time making this eerie, hissing sound. It sounded like an animal hissing or breathing. The other rockets hit our line in very rapid bursts, and our zone around the bunkers was absolutely filled with the bright pale flames. One rocket hit our blockhouse on the wall outside the pack gun aperture, and the explosion was completely blinding. The pack was about 10 meters away from me, and I saw many fragments of burning material pour in through the aperture and fall onto the floor around the pack. These fragments themselves expanded and burned, until in a few moments the gun seemed to be covered in these bright, blazing pieces of material. This fire simply would not go out. It covered the pack crew and sank into their ammunition pile. There was complete panic and disorder at that point. The men near the pack were consumed in these white flames, including the weeping man on the ground who had lost his nerves earlier and several injured men nearby. The uniforms of these men peeled off in scorched pieces and their bare skin was set alight by the fire. A round of the 75mm ammunition detonated in the flames, was hurled towards us and came through the aperture. It blasted around the interior of our bunker, glowing red with tracer. This shell smashed off the wall, off the ceiling and off the other walls. Each time it hit a man or group of men, it cut them horribly before bouncing elsewhere. Somebody threw open the steel door of the bunker and I hurled myself at it. Other men were competing with me to get out of the inferno inside and we fought each other with our bare hands at the doorway. I stumbled through, over the body of a man who had collapsed outside and whose hair was on fire. I ran a few paces away from the structure. I made the mistake of looking back into the bunker through the door. I can tell you that the interior was a vision of hell, an obscene sight that remains with me to this day. The white burning material was still expanding and burning alive the men who had not escaped through the door. Men were rolling and struggling on the floor in the flames. Some were clawing blindly at the walls, trying to feel the route out, with their faces all covered in smoke because their clothing was on fire. Pack rounds and MG rounds were detonating in there, in the confined space, and the tracer was screaming from one wall to another, tearing up the bodies of men where they stood or lay. I backed away from the door, as a couple of other men staggered out after me, with their backs and legs on fire. Finally, all I could see inside the bunker was the flickering white light of the incendiary and many flashes of exploding rounds. All that I could hear was the screaming and groaning of men and the strange hiss of the burning rockets as the last salvo of them exploded in front of our line. I shook myself, and looked around for guidance. My bunker was destroyed from inside, and I could see that the bunker on the right was in a similar state. The hole in its side was releasing white flames and smoke. On my left, The third bunker had its steel doors still closed, but its apertures were streaming with the incendiary flames and there were explosions inside. Nearby, the jumble of vehicles was completely on fire, with the trucks and precious half-tracks thrown onto their sides and many wheels and bits of engine debris strewn about. The wreckage of the crashed Thunderbolt plane was among them, burning fiercely with its tail rising up above the rest. Behind me, the 20mm flak gun had been hit by bombs and it lay in pieces in a crater with its crew. I was one of the few survivors of the attack. I learned afterwards that this material was a phosphorus weapon. The devastating thing about this phosphorus was that the fire kept growing and expanding and it flowed almost like a liquid, eating into anything it touched. My God, I saw some of the bodies of our troops in the trench lines that had been hit by these rockets. The bodies were reduced to skeletons. Very black and charred, as all the body material was burned off and consumed. I confess that I was terrified at the sight, not knowing how soon the Thunderbolt planes would come back and strike us again. The psychological impact of such weapons is part of their effectiveness. Even the survivors are left fearful and incapacitated. As for me, I had no gun, my uniform was scorched and in shreds and the morphine cocktail was wearing off, leaving me trembling and shattered. The air was full of smoke and dust and the sun had a very harsh glare, which made it difficult to see around me. 2 other men came up to me, both Wehrmacht troops, and we crouched down considering what to do. There were no officers visible. A few other men were appearing from the smoke, but these were running away from the bunkers to the southeast in complete disorder. A man appeared who was armed with a Panzerschreck. He had the firing tube slung around his back and had 2 projectiles with him, which he carried tenderly in his arm as if they were prize rabbits. That is the way it looked to me, with my confused senses. From the roadway we could hear the sound of tank movement, which was rising and falling. Our view was obscured by smoke and dust, but this was thinning because the coastal breeze was strengthening across our area. The 2 troops said that they were going to retreat, because the bunkers were destroyed. However, the Panzerschreck man insisted that he wanted to fire his 2 projectiles. He said that these could destroy any Allied tank at 200 meters and that we would be decorated as heroes when our own panzers arrived. It occurred to me that he was mentally confused. But so was I at this point, and I was also past the stage of being afraid for the future. For this reason, even though the 2 other men retreated on foot to the rear of the bunkers and left the area, I stayed with the Panzerschreck man and agreed to operate as his loader. I took an MP40 from the body of one of our men and 2 spare magazines. We took up a position between 2 wrecked vehicles, a half-track and an armored car, behind a concrete slab. This was near the crashed Thunderbolt, but the smoke from its flames was blowing away from us. We had a good view along the track beside the flood water. The trees along the track were burning in some places and there was debris of machinery scattered along the ground. The Panzerschreck gunner told me how to load the rocket projectile into the launcher tube, which he had over his shoulder. I loaded one of the 2 rounds. I then rolled away, as he instructed me, as to not be hit by the backblast. I flattened myself, holding my MP40, and looked towards the track. I could see the outline of a tank coming through the smoke from the burning trees. This tank had a very tall silhouette, and as it advanced on us, I saw that it had a white star on the front plate. This made it very obvious, almost like a target at a fairground shooting stall. In my confused mental state, that is the image I had of this tank. The range was about 200 meters. The Panzerschreck man said, "It's a Sherman, we can finish him." And before I could respond, he fired. A huge spout of sparks and fire came out from the back of the tube, burning my face with the heat, even though I was away from its jet. I saw the projectile go streaking towards the Sherman and it struck the front plate, low down between the tracks. The explosion was not large, but I saw many fragments of metal burst off the hull immediately and the tracks stopped moving. The vehicle halted and rocked violently, and I was surprised that the machine gun in the hull did not fire. I suppose this was because the projectile had killed or injured the gunner. However, the turret machine gun fired on us and the bullets ripped up the wrecked vehicles that we were hiding behind. We crouched behind the concrete slab, and I reloaded the rocket launcher. The Sherman stopped shooting at us and I heard crackling sounds which sounded as if it was burning. We peered over the concrete slab and saw that this tank was on fire, and its crew were climbing out of the hatches. One of them had a submachine gun and I fired on him with my MP40, knocking him down immediately. The other crewmen scattered and ran to the back of the tank. I rolled away, because I saw that the Panzerschreck was going to fire again. After he fired, I heard another small detonation and I peered around the edge of the slab to see that the rocket had actually hit a second Sherman which was attempting to steer around the immobilized one. This second tank was hit on the edge of the front hull, by the drive sprocket, and its track was blown off. This was an incredible success for us, to have hit 2 tanks with 2 shots, and I remember feeling a sensation of great pride in this achievement. Of course, our actions were punished by the second tank which fired on us with high explosive shells. These shells blew up the vehicles near us and showered us with debris. We were trapped behind the concrete slab and unable to move away from its shelter. In between the explosions, I could hear the revving and clanking of other tanks trying to maneuver on the narrow road. My mood changed completely. I thought that we were close to death, and close to losing our battle. The Panzerschreck was hit by shrapnel which hit him in the shoulder and neck, and he began bleeding heavily. He threw away his rocket launcher and took a grenade from his boot, handing it to me. I thought that he wanted me to throw it at the tanks. But what use was that? Then he told me that we should blow ourselves up rather than be captured. He was either very fanatical or mentally unbalanced. I never considered blowing myself up. Why would I do such a thing? There was no reason. We were honest foot soldiers, defending France and ultimately the Reich from aggression. But as we crouched there behind the concrete, with these high explosive rounds smashing up the wrecked transports around us, there was the noise of another tank from the south, from the direction of our lines. My spirits lifted greatly. I believed that our panzer reinforcements were arriving at the last possible moment to assist us and defend this bunker line. I imagined a great formation of our panzers, pushing the Americans back into the sea, just as the Feldwebel had promised us in the bunker. However, all that arrived was a single, solitary Stug 3. This was a self-propelled 75mm pack on a very low Panzer III chassis. It was renowned as an excellent vehicle in use against tanks. I had seen these Stugs used in Italy, and they had inflicted great losses on Shermans. But this was only one, and as it advanced on our position I expected to see others behind it. There were no others. It turned out that this Stug commander had risked his vehicle to approach the bunker line alone and assess the situation. We gestured to the Stug and it presumably saw us, because it came at us rapidly, drove around us and fired several shots at the roadway. I heard impacts and explosions from down there. I tried to lift the Panzerschreck, but I was too weak and he was too heavy, so I left him lying behind the concrete. I do not know what happened to him. The Stug, having seen the situation on the road, began to reverse away slowly, still firing its gun. It did not stop for me, but the commander, who was behind an armored shield on the roof hatch, gestured to me to climb on.